Okay, so I am still continuing to construct the straight waistband, and I just got back from the iron, and what I did was I first pressed the seam as it was stitched, so straight, and then I pressed the seam allowances for the waistband up into the waistband itself. So what we need to do is we need to come back and trim a little bit. So hopefully you guys will be able to see what I'm trimming here. I'm trimming along that seam that I had just done, and I'm going to trim that about down to 1/4 inch, and I'm just going to just take my scissors and cut off about, I would say almost half of that seam allowance that's there. Make sure that you don't accidentally have your scissors underneath of your whole waistband because you don't want to cut into the top part that's folded down. So just make sure that you're again trimming off the seam that you made when you attached your waistband to the skirt itself. And again, I'm trimming that about to half the width that it was, and that's around about 1/4 inch all the way around. So, so once you have that trimmed, the next step that you're going to want to do is fold down the top part of your skirt. So here we have the skirt here. This is the seam that we just did. Now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to fold down, and I would go ahead and press that because it's just going to kind of make handling things a little bit easier. Fold down that 5/8 inch seam allowance, and again, there should be some markings if you transfer those. But if not, then I would use your seam gauge and make sure that you're folding this down 5/8 inch, and I would put some pins in and then go over to the ironing board and just press that into place so you don't have to worry so much about keeping everything in place as you stitch the next stages of this the waistband. So what we need to do is we need to finish off this edge right here, so that this edge of this underlap part. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to actually fold the sample, the waistband back upon itself. Now if you've already identified this 5/8 inch fold back, that's going to match up right with that seam of where you attached your waistband to your skirt. So what you can do is you can just gently fold that down, and then we're going you're going to fold down the 5/8 inch, fold down from the top of your waistband towards the skirt with right sides together. And then what we want to do is we actually want to just put a pin in, making sure that we can keep those layers flat. We're just putting a pin in on that over and under tab. So we don't really need to match up all the rest of this right now. We're just concerned with finishing off the edge of our tabs. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to match up, take this top folded edge and match it up down with the edge of where my seam is connecting my waistband to my skirt, and then I'm going to put a pin in along that open edge for where my underlap and overlap is along the waistband. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a seam here, which is from 5/8. I'm going to take this raw edge of the waistband, this tab that's sticking out. I'm going to run this raw edge right along the 5/8. Make sure, I think I'm running out of top thread here. Hopefully I can get through this closure here before I need to change. But I'm going to go ahead and again, just lining up those raw edges with the 5/8 inch guideline markings. I'm going to go ahead and put my needle in, and then I'm going to do some back stitching at the front of that, or at the front of my stitch line, and again at the back of it. I'm going to take that pin out, and then as I get to the end, do some back stitching, and feel free to go a little bit farther back so we're almost like reinforcing that entire stitch. And I'm going to go ahead and trim those thread tails, and I'm going to go ahead and do the other side as well. Again, making sure that I'm running this raw edge along the 5/8 inch guideline. I'm going to start, do some back stitching, and then as I approach the other side, do some back stitching there. Great. I'm going to go ahead and trim that sample out and trim those thread tails up. Now what we need to do is we really need to trim this up here, because this is going to be really bulky when we go to turn it around. And so the first thing that we need to do, and this is with any corner, we always want to trim. So I'm going to trim it to almost about 1/8 of an inch. 1/8 of an inch away from that seam line that I did. And then I want to come back to where where the waistband folds upon itself, and I just want to clip off that little triangle corner. Hopefully you can see that there. I just trimmed off that little triangle corner, and then I'm going to do the same thing for this side. I'm going to trim it to about 1/8 of an inch away from that stitch line that I just put in, and then I'm going to come back in and I'm going to trim up just that little triangle corner. And so what you can do is, and then what you're going to do is you're going to want to put your thumbs inside and go ahead and flip that cornered piece around. And what I do is I'm gently going to take my scissors and just make sure, use the tip of them to make sure that that cornered is, the corner part that was flipped up is pointed. So I'm going to do that for the other side too. And take my scissors and just gently, ever so gently, just nudge that corner out. You don't want to use too much muscle because you might poke your scissors right through, and that would not be a good thing. All right. So the next thing that we're going to want to do is we want to fold, after we have that waistband turned around and the corners out. Let me check my camera. We're doing okay. Didn't want to accidentally run out of time here. And I'm going to start at that side seam, the right side seam. And what you're doing is you're folding this folded edge down to match right with where that stitch line was. And then you're just going to be matching that up all the way around. I'm aligning mine so that it just goes on the other side of that stitch line. So I really can't see it when I'm looking at it, but it's just setting pretty much right on top of the stitch line or the seam line where we attached the waistband to the skirt. So I'm just going to put some pins in right along that edge. I'm going to go ahead and stop here so you guys can try to do a zoom in with where things are being placed, and hopefully, because I know that sometimes it's difficult to see exactly where I'm lining these fabrics up at. So hopefully you can see that there, that you no longer see that stitch line, but what I'm doing is this is that seam line that we had previously done, and I'm folding down this waistband so that it lines up just on top of that stitch line, and I'm putting a pin in to hold it in place. Okay, just finish working around, and this is pretty thick. We're going through quite a few layers here, especially as that waistband is, you know, it's folded over. You know, it has the 5/8 inch turn under from that seam allowance. So we're going through quite a bit of thickness here. So just know that you might need to put a little extra oomph in getting those pins in a little bit. Okay, now what your book suggests that you do is that you go ahead and slip stitch the sample or the waistband to the skirt. But what I want to do is I actually want to show you a different technique that you can use. But you really have to make sure that that your waistband is covering that stitch edge. Because what we're going to do is we're going to actually stitch from the front side and do a technique that's called stitch in the ditch. Now if you do not want to do this, if you feel more confident with your hand sewing technique, and maybe you want to finish this up at home and you don't have your sewing machine at home, then I would suggest doing that. Now where we're going to start this stitching is 5/8 of an inch in, because what we're going to have to do, like if we were putting in a zipper here, we would have already put the zipper in, but we need to have this extra seam allowance here to catch on to the zipper. So I'm going to go in and just trim this extra skirt fabric back right to that 5/8 inch seam allowance, so then this could be folded back. Now this would have already been done if we were putting in a zipper, but just for the sake of attaching our waistband to the skirt, I'm just going to go ahead and trim it right now. Okay, then what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you how to stitch. They call it stitch in the ditch. And what that is we're going to stitch right inside this seam by kind of like almost like pulling this fabric back a little bit, and we want to stitch right underneath, like almost in the same stitch line that we had done when we seamed it together. Now since we overlap that stitch line by folding our waistband down, it should catch everything as it needs to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start right where I put this edge, this last pin in, kind of where I trimmed that fabric at, and I'm going to go ahead and change my top thread because I am almost, oh, I don't know, maybe I'll make it. I guess if I run out part way, then I'll just stop and you guys can finish on your own, but I'm so close. I think I might be able to make it. So what I'm going to do is I'm lining up my presser foot and my fabric so that when I lower my needle, it's going in right below that waistline seam. Okay, like it is right in that seam. It's in the ditch of where those fabrics meet. So I'm going to go ahead, and I'm not going to do, I don't want to do any back stitching because this is going to be fairly delicate. And again, if this is not something that you feel comfortable doing at this point, slip stitch this into place. You know, you can always do your hand sewing at home if you want to kind of catch up and do, you know, use the machine while you're in class. And so you're going to want to go slow, and if you feel that some of those pins might be getting in the way, I'm going to go ahead and just pull them out, or just pull them out a little bit more so that your presser foot does not run over your pin head, because that will usually cause your presser foot to kind of get all a little bit wonky, and then your stitches are going to kind of jump to places where they shouldn't be. And again, I'm going really slow. My nose is like down in this sample, so I can see exactly where that needle's going into, and I can really guide my fabric as needed. I'm going to go ahead and take that pin out because I feel like it might be getting in the way. Again, just real slow, controlling that speed with my foot pedal, making sure that my fabric is flat, and I'm stitching in that ditch. Now if you accidentally jump up into your waistband just like for one stitch, that's not the end of the world, but you know, it's better to go slow and try to keep this as consistent as you can while you're stitching along here. This is kind of like our final, almost final step. We just need to close up that left side seam up to where the zipper will go in, and then we're almost done. So again, I'm just going super slow, stitching right in that ditch. Now if you were using, like I have, you know, this electric blue thread as my top thread, but if you were using the thread color that matches your fabric perfectly, you're not going to see this stitch line at all. So if I was using white thread, I probably wouldn't be able to even see it barely, but since I'm using this blue to kind of like help with instruction, and so I can see where my stitches are, then it is going to be a little bit more visible, but not too much. Alright, I'm getting right back to that end point, and I'm just going to go ahead and stop there, raise up my needle. I'm not going to do any back stitching because that may cause some irregular stitches and a little extra bulk. I'm going to come back and trim up these thread tails as well, and then I'm going to remove all my pins if there are any left in there because they were kind of on the back side. And what I can see from the back side, this is something that you're going to want to check. You want to make sure that no part, or that all of your waistband has stitching on it. If for any reason, like your stitching jumped down into the skirt and is not being caught, then you're going to want to take out that section and re-stitch it. So use your seam rubber and take that out. I see that I have a little bit of irregular stitches there. So what I might do is I might just take out that section real quick and re-stitch it. So I'm just going to take out, it's probably about maybe six stitches in length, so it's not that big a deal. So I'm just going to go ahead and break those on the back side, and I'm going to remove the back side of them, and then I'll go onto the front and re-stitch those into place. So this is not like a big error by any means, but it's an error that I can see, and it kind of bothers me a little bit. So I can see where my stitch line moved here, so I'm just going to do some overlap stitches. I'm going to start right where, just like maybe about 4 or 5 stitches back from where it was, and again I'm just going to realign this up and just stitch right over a few stitches, and then close that up so it's right along that, right in that inside that ditch, and then I'm just going to do a couple more overlap stitches and pull that out and trim those thread tails. So what I can see is that now I don't have any irregular stitches on the front or on the back, and all of my waistband is caught, so that there's not going to be any weird holes or anything like that. So hopefully you can see that I've just stitched right along that edge, kind of like a top stitch almost. And again, if you don't feel comfortable doing this, this is where my error was, so I can come back in and trim up that thread that is no longer attached to anything on the back side. Make sure that's all good. Alright, so again, if you don't feel too comfortable with stitching the stitch line in, or doing the stitch in the ditch stitch, then what I would suggest doing is just doing a slip stitch on the back side and attaching it to your skirt, and that's perfectly fine. So what I'm going to do next is I have these lower markings, which is where you would put in a zipper. Typically you would measure your zipper placement, but all the patterns that you're going to use will have this identified. And I'm going to start by putting my pins in right at that lower notch where the zipper would be placed, and we're just closing it up down to the bottom of the skirt, so along the hemline. So I'm going to start my stitching there, lining up my raw edge with 5/8 inch, and I'm going to do some back stitching. So I'm going to lower my needle. I'm going to take out that pin now, and I'm just going to do a couple bits of back stitching, and then continue out this lines and do some back stitching on the end here. Alright, done and done. Trim those tails up on the front of that stitch line as well as at the end. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this over to the ironing board. I'm going to open up this seam, and then I'm just going to press both of these seam allowances back to where that 5/8 inch would be, just so I can get a visual of how it would look with the overlap and the underlap. So I'm not going to video doing that, but just to get a quick look, I think you guys will be pretty happy by the fact that you sewed this mini skirt. This could possibly be something that you would do for your first project in class. And again, you'll know which one is the front and back by that center back seam here, and then there's no seam in the front. And we know that it is open on the left side seam for us to get into. So what you would do eventually is we'd place a skirt hook here on top of the zipper, making sure that everything's closed up. You might actually put a snap or something there too, just to make sure everything is good to go. And typically the tab that goes around the front of you will be on the top side of that overlap. So we have our overlap and our underlap here, and they just crisscross on top of each other. Alright, so I'm going to do a final pressing on this, and I'm going to label it as the straight waistband and place it in my binder.